Hello everybody and welcome back to Operation Logistics, where we just finished making this water shader in the last episode. It looks a little something like this. It's not, amazingly fancy, but it gets the job done. Looks halfway decent. Okay, so let's go about applying this. This isn't just our water shader, keep in mind. This is kind of our shader for everything. This is our multi-purpose shader. So, let's go ahead and apply this to our prefab here, our base hex. So let's get that out here. We can get rid of this plane. We no longer need that. And let's go ahead and apply our water material. And notice that we have a problem. It isn't showing up. There is a reason for this, and the reason is we have not UV unwrapped this mesh, which is certainly something we want to do. So let's go ahead and go into our meshes here and edit our mesh in Blender. And I'm just going to select all here with a double tap of A, tab to go into edit mode, and double tap A to select everything. UV, and this is a lazy way of doing this. As you are probably aware by now, I like the lazy way. I'm just going to run a quick cube projection. We're kind of cube adjacent. And then I'm going to save that. And there we go. Look at that. We've now got ourselves... Yeah, I realize that. Mesh doesn't have UVs, but it does now. Excellent. So, let's go ahead and run this, and we should see that our base hex has itself some nice water animation to it. Fantastic. Now, there's probably going to be a seam if we have multiple hexes next to each other. It kind of is what it is. We'll address that later on, but for right now, this will be just fine. So our hex now has that, and we don't necessarily want it to always be water, right? So let's go ahead and go into our materials and make it back having the hex material there. But let's change the hex material from standard to ground shader. Now, we have a normal map shader without a normal map. I am going to go ahead and toss in a normal map here, and this is going to be the water waves large, just to have a small amount of detail on the surface here. And do we want any metallic? No. Do we want any smoothness? Probably not. So let's go ahead and take a quick look at how this looks in the actual game here. Okay, so this is what we've got right now. It's got that kind of unsightly line down the middle, which is a wee bit unfortunate. Now the question is, why is that there? Well, it's not the normal map, I can tell you that. It might be the lack of diffuse texture. I don't think it is. I'm reasonably certain that the issue right now is our global illumination. So let's go into our lighting tab in the inspector here and turn off baked global illumination. And there we go. Problem solved. And actually, I kind of want to turn up our skybox intensity multiplier by maybe like 1.5. Just brighten it up a little bit. There we go. That'll do fine. So we now have, back in our inspector, our hex material is going well here. We can animate it if we wanted to. It wouldn't make much sense to animate this. However, if we wanted to have like flowing grass or something like that, I suppose we could. It'd be maybe a little weird looking, but it is theoretically possible. But the important thing is these are the same shader, so that way we can make some interesting changes later on. So we're going to do the same thing with our cliff material here. And for this, I'm going to use the small normal map. There we go. We've got ourselves a little bit of detail on the cliffs. Not much, but a little bit. And then the border material is going to also have the ground shader. And for a normal map, I'm just probably, well, it's got the box, and I got to make the box go away. So we'll use a large normal map. Okay. So, let's go ahead and apply our base hex there. And I'm going to re-enable the hex manager, and we'll see how this runs. It should be basically the same as it was before. Almost no different. And that does indeed appear to be the case. It's basically the same as it was before, almost no different. Fantastic. And we can zoom to our hex and zoom out, and we've got our highlighting. Excellent. This is all going according to plan. So next we need to get ourselves our water, yeah? So let's think about how we want to do that. So we can think about doing this a couple of different ways. One, we could have a different prefab for each type, and I think that's the way we're going to end up doing it. So we have ourselves our base hex here. I'm going to duplicate it, and snap settings changed? Okay, whatever. The distance that it needs to move is 1.732. There we go. I just happen to know that off the top of my head. So here we have ourselves 2 hexes. One of these will be changed shortly. In fact, right now. Now it's a water hex. Look at that. That was easy. So let's go ahead and make ourselves a new prefab here. And I'm going to call this the, instead of base hex, I'm going to call this the water hex. Excellent. And I just want to make sure that this saved properly, and it looks like it did. So I'm going to go ahead and delete these, and let's hop into our hex manager script here. And let's get ourselves a new game object. So public game object water hex. There we go. And with that in play, we will go ahead and in fact, you know what? I'm going to make a slight change here. I'm going to move these prefabs here to the top of Hex Manager. And I'm going to say header prefabs. There we go. And now, yeah, this is fine. We can hide this in Inspector for now. No, no, no. There we go. Hide in Inspector. And then here, header, and we're just going to do, like, say, map settings. And I'm going to uncomment our water level, since we're going to be using that momentarily. Okay, let's make sure our ground hex, or rather our base hex, stays the same. There we go. And get ourselves our water hex in there. Fantastic. Okay, so now let's go ahead and go through here, and we need to say, let's see, what is our reposition minus hex height? Oh, right. I remember what that's for. So at this point, we need to determine whether we want to instantiate base hex or water hex. However, we have not gone through and done our Voronoi yet. That's a bit problematic, because we instantiate before we do our Voronoi height. Interesting. So how do I want to handle this? Well, it's still, the water hexes are still going to be of type base hex, so we don't need to worry about that. I think for right now, all we need to do okay, I think I have a plan, and I'll show you what the plan is. So, this is our hex setup here. We have our base hex, we have our water hex. These are basically the same thing, they just have a different world hex material inside of them, and technically, the water hex probably doesn't need internal hexes. We'll deal with that in a little bit, though. So, what we could do is we could change the world hex inside of the water hex, and then just rename it, because this is literally the same thing externally. Alternately, we could just go through, instead of doing a prefab, and change in here. That's another option, and I think that's probably what we're going to end up doing, because literally the only difference right now between these two hexes is element 0 of the material array. This one has hex material, this one has water. That's literally the only difference right now. So let's go ahead and do that down here. So I do think that, I do think that maybe we should consider changing at this point our list of hexes from GameObject to base hex. This is going to break a few things. Yep, new list of base hex. And then down here, we want to add, instead of... Okay, so what we want to do is we want to say something along the lines of base hex, hex script equals... That's not how you spell. Hex script equals this right here. New object.getComponent in children base hex.manager. Well, not really. Just not the .manager. Everything else. And then we want to say hex script.manager equals this. And then instead of adding new object, we want to add hex script. So that way we always have a reference to the hex script. And then down here, let's see, Voronoi seeds is currently set to GameObject. We can just simply change that over to hex script, or rather base hex. What am I talking about? New list base hex. Okay, and then down here we've got ourselves a GameObject. So let's use base hex instead of GameObject here. Same here. And we have no more errors. Excellent. So we've got that refactored to use base hex instead of GameObject, and that'll give us a little bit more flexibility. In base hex, let's go ahead and store what type of hex it is. So there are a couple of things that I'd like to do at this point. Inside of base hex, actually, do we want it in base hex? Maybe we just want it up here. Public enum, and the enum will be something along the lines of hex classification. Okay, so this is the types of hex that the world hex can be. Not that the sub or sub-sub hexes can be, but this is just the world hexes. These can be water, they can be rural, or they can be urban. And that's it. Anything else is a subclassification of this. So let's go ahead and do a public hex classification. If I can type. There we go. Classification. So let's go ahead and set the classification in the hex manager at this point. Now, we can't necessarily know whether it's rural or urban at this juncture. We're going to have to do another Voronoi another Voronoi pass at some point. So let's just go ahead and set rural as the default unless we are at a height below the water level in our Voronoi height. So let's go ahead and say something along the lines of, let's see, we are changing all of them. This is where we set the seeds. So we should probably say something along the lines of down here or so. We should probably say something along the lines of if, and what is our height that we've generated? Where's our, oh, new pose.y? Okay. So if, we'll just use height level. If height level is less than water level, which, what did we default our water level to? We defaulted that to 2. Okay, so that's going to be kind of interesting. I think water level should be set to 0. And let's make this, instead of being less than, let's make this be less than or equal to. So only the very lowest level right now, by default, will have water. So that way we don't have to do fancy things like waterfalls, because I'm lazy. Okay, so if height level is less than or equal to the water level, then we should go ahead and set map x, y, dot classification to be hex classification dot water. Okay, so we're setting it to be water here. And this is in the seeds. We'll have to do it again down here, but that's okay. Once we have it done for the seeds, we should be fine. So hex classification.water, and then we need to change the material in the renderer, which is going to be kind of exciting. So we need to have a reference to the mesh renderer. So let's go ahead and here have a public mesh renderer, like so. Okay, fine. We'll go with rend. You know, rend and tear. Bleed all over the place. Rend equals get component mesh renderer. Typing is hard. And I'm going to do this in awake instead of start. I just want to make sure that we get this done before we're messing around with it in the hex manager. So let's do it in awake so we do it right away. Hopefully. Hopefully we do it right away. And then we're going to need ourselves some materials here. So let's get ourselves a header. Header materials. And let's do a public material ground material. Just a very basic ground mat. And then public material water material. Now we're going to do a lot of our ground material stuff actually with mesh colors. It's a very efficient way to do this, but the ground material we will go ahead and, or the water material we'll go ahead and assign. So let's say something along the lines of map x y dot rend dot materials 0. We are changing the first one in the array equals water material. And that should get that pretty much done. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this and paste this down here. And we're going to say here. Okay, if height level is less than water level, so we need to calculate this slightly differently. And we need to say map ij instead of map xy because I decided to change my nomenclature, apparently. Okay, so if new position dot y is less than or equal to, now how do we calculate that height? Height level times height per level. So less than or equal to water level times height per level. Okay. Now we need to assign our water in the inspector, our water material, as well as our ground material, I suppose. I'm not sure we actually need that reference, but it'll work. Hex material and water. Let's get rid of these. And theoretically, we don't need a water hex prefab if we're doing it this way. So what do we got? Is it going to work? Maybe. I don't know if... These batches. So it broke the batching, for sure. And then I don't know that it actually did anything with it. Let's take a quick look here. So, hex material. Yeah. Huh. So it touched them, but it didn't actually change it, causing it to instance and break the batching. That's kind of what I was afraid of. Okay. So with that being the case, we only need to do this under the proper circumstances, though. Was there just no water there? I don't know. We'll find out. We'll set the water... Actually, the water level was 2, so it should have worked. Let's see here. Come on. Yeah. So the height per level is 0.25. If the height of something is 0, which these are, these should be water. So the question is, why did it not switch over here to be water material? That's what it should have done. Because it should be right there. But for some reason, it has decided not to. And I'm not sure why. What a jerk. Well, let's see if we can figure it out. Okay, so if height level is less than or equal to water level, up here, classification equals hex class... Oh, yeah, we should check the classification of the hex, actually. That's a good call. If it classifies the hex but didn't change the water, then we know something. Classification water, classification water, water, water. All of these are water. It defaults to water. Because we need to say something along the lines of else classification equals, for now, we're going to default it to rural. We'll go through and do a rural versus urban map later on. But for right now, we'll need something along the lines of that. And then that. Okay. So the question... Compiler error. Oh, of course. Nomenclature change. This needs to be X and Y up here. Fantastic. Okay, so the next question is it actually doing anything? Well, we'll find out. Failure is part of the process here. Okay, so we've got ourselves water type, as well it should be. It did not change the material. This is rural up here, so that is working correctly. It's just not changing the material. Okay. So what happens if we go into these materials and we disable GPU instancing, hypothetically? I just want to know what happens, if anything. Interestingly, the batches went way up, but it runs better. That's a little weird. Okay. So let's try this again with the instancing re-enabled and see if it still runs better. And this is definitely better. Okay. Still not great, don't get me wrong, but... So, the question then becomes, obviously, changing our material this way is not a great way to handle this. Ultimately, we probably want to have this working another way, but for right now, I just want to have it working, period. So, I wonder if we perhaps can't set that material that way. What? I believe that does the same thing. What if we do it like that? Maybe we have to set the materials as a full array. It's a possibility, I suppose. Let's find out. Yep, that's more like it. Okay, and that's actually working for the batching, too. Okay, that's perfect. So for right now, I would like to set our Hex Manager water level back down to 0, so it's just the lowest level of water. Now the other thing we could do is set the height of all of the water levels to be the same. And I kind of want to do that so that we always have the water be flat. So essentially what I'm saying is... what I'm saying is we would always set the Y position to be height level times height... Instead of height level times height per level, if it's less than or equal to the water level, we would go in and change this again to be, instead of height level times height per level, it would be water level times height per level. So that way it's always equal to the water level, even if we crank up the water level. And we'll do the same thing over here. We set the new pose there. Excellent. So new pose.y would then be equal to water level times height per level. So now we can theoretically crank the water level up to, I don't know, 4 if we want it to be just a tiny little archipelago. And that should create us a bunch of islands and a bunch of flat water. Okay? It didn't. Well, it created us a bunch of flat water, but it also created us this nonsense. And it's all water. Now, that is theoretically possible that it would be all water with a water level of 4. Let's see what it's like with a water level of 3. What do we got? Okay, that's a bit more like what I expected. Oh, right, 0 to... Right, I know why that happened. As for why this is happening, I'm guessing these are Voronoi seeds, and it's just not correctly setting their height. Let's see here. If height level is less than or equal to water level, new position.y equals water level times height per level. But we transform the position here rather than here. So if we just move that to the other side of the if check, then it'll work fine. And this was just because I forgot I was 0 indexed instead of 1 indexed. So that's not a big deal. As far as this goes, let's just make sure that this is now working. Our water levels are now flat. Fantastic. So if hypothetically we wanted to crank this up a bit, we could have 10 height levels and have our water level be, say, 4. That'll give us some interestingness. We'll see what that gives us exactly. But yes, you can see here our water is now all the same level. You don't necessarily want that, but if we were to crank up our water level to, say, 6, and create ourselves a series of islands, then that would make for some interesting things. Yeah, see, now it makes sense that our water is all the same level. Fantastic. Okay, so there is a small problem here, and that is that. You zoom to a hex, and it shows you a bunch of land hexes in the water. So we should probably do some checks on that. There is one more thing, though, that I really want to do this episode. So let's go ahead and, in our map settings, give ourselves a public float seed. And then here in the generate map function at the very beginning, I'm going to put in random.seed equals seed. Oh, okay. Random.seed is obsolete, deprecated. Use initState or random.state property instead. Random.state then gives us the full internal state of the random number generator. Do we do a seed here? No? Okay, how do we do this now? And this is actually an int. So let's go ahead and change this to public int seed. Use a initState function. So initState. Int seed. Gotcha. Initializes it with this seed. So now if we, for example, as soon as it recompiles, if we, for example, set in a seed of 76, this is a weird seed to set, but whatever. We can now have this map that it spawns right here. And keep this map in mind. You've got the 3 islands up here and then kind of the peninsular structure right there. And now it should generate exactly the same map again, because we're seeding it the same number every time. And there it is. Exactly the same map. Fantastic. However, if we change the seed to 77, it will be a completely different map. Millions of possibilities. Excellent. Okay, well, I think that's a great place to put in a cut. We've got a little bit of work to do yet, but we are making great progress here. Next episode, we will be working on, I don't know, maybe the water hexes or something, because having the land hexes in the water hexes is weird. We'll get to that in the next episode, I think. See you all next time.